The explosion lit up the darkness of space like a dying star. Another battleship turned to dust and metal fragments. This happened every day, every hour, somewhere in the 17 star systems caught between the hegemony and the collective. Commander Zektal watched from his command ship as his fleet pushed forward. The same battle played out for the 1,000th time. His purple skin showed no emotion as another 10,000 soldiers died in seconds. After 3,000 years of war, death had become as common as breathing. The hegemony controlled 9 systems. The collective controlled 8. They had been fighting over the same territories since before most current species had even discovered fire. Every time one side gained ground, the other pushed back. Every victory led to a defeat. Every defeat led to a counterattack. In the great halls of the Galactic Council, representatives from 40 neutral species sat in silence. They had given up trying to speak about the war. What was there to say? The hegemony and the collective would not listen. They never listened. Attempt number 847 has failed, announced the council speaker, a tall being with crystalline skin that reflected the frustrated faces around him. Both sides refused to even enter the same room. Nobody was surprised. The war had become more than just a conflict. It had become the identity of both civilizations. Children of the hegemony learned to hate the collective before they learned to walk. Collective younglings played games where they destroyed hegemony worlds. Entire generations had lived and died knowing nothing but war. On the hegemony homeworld of Drax Prime, factories covered every continent. They produced warships, weapons, and soldiers. Nothing else. The sky was black from the smoke of endless production. Rivers ran red with chemical waste from munitions plants. Nobody complained. This was life. Supreme Leader Korthax stood on his balcony, looking out at his empire of steel and fire. He was the 17th Supreme Leader since the war began. Like all before him, he had one purpose: destroy the collective. His generals brought him the same reports every day. Minor victory here, minor defeat there. The line never really moved. "My lord," said General Thrax, entering the war room, "the collective has taken the outer moon of System 7. "Then we take it back," Korthax replied without emotion. It was always the same response. Meanwhile, in collective space, the situation mirrored the hegemony exactly. Their homeworld of unity had become one giant military base. Their overmind, a consciousness made from the connected thoughts of their ruling class, calculated battle strategies every moment of every day. The calculations always came to the same conclusion: continue fighting. The neutral species watched this endless dance of death with growing fear. The war was spreading, not through conquest but through necessity. Trade routes were destroyed. Refugee ships fled in millions. Resources became scarce as both sides consumed everything for their war machines. The Alkari, a peaceful bird-like species, had to build their first warships in 10,000 years just to protect their borders. The Dendrons, sentient plant beings who had never known violence, started growing thorns and poison. Even the pacifist monks of Xelon began training warriors. "The war will consume us all," said Ambassador Quix of the Salthan Republic during a secret meeting of neutral worlds. "Our projections show that within 200 years, every spacefaring species will be forced to choose a side or be destroyed." The mathematics of war were simple and terrifying. The hegemony and collective each spent 78% of their total resources on the war. Their populations were declining. Birth rates had fallen to critical levels because so many died young in battle. Education systems taught only what was needed for war. Art, music, literature, all had been forgotten, yet neither side could stop. To stop meant to admit 3,000 years of death meant nothing. To stop meant to face the reality of what they had become. To stop meant to lose everything that defined them. The war had its own momentum now, like a boulder rolling down a mountain. Each side had defense treaties that pulled in smaller species. Those species had their own agreements. The web of alliances and obligations grew more complex every year. Computer models showed that even if both leaders wanted peace, the bureaucracy of war would take decades to untangle. Captain Vera Shan of the merchant vessel, Lucky Strike, had seen enough. She was from a new species that had just discovered faster-than-light travel. Humans, they called themselves. Her ship had been trying to establish trade routes when they stumbled into the war zone. "This is insane," she told her crew, as they watched another battle from a safe distance. "They're using the same tactics we studied in our military history classes." Tactics that stopped working on Earth 500 years ago. Her science officer, James Park, pulled up the scan data. Captain, look at this. Their supply lines are completely exposed. A child could see the weakness, but they don't attack them, Vera observed. They just keep smashing fleets against each other like it's some kind of ritual. The humans had been watching for 6 months. They had permission from the council to observe but not interfere. What they saw defied logic. Both sides had similar technology, similar numbers, similar resources. The war should have ended in mutual destruction centuries ago. Instead, it had reached a perfect, terrible balance. The council met again as they did every cycle to discuss the war. The conversations never changed. Some members wanted to intervene militarily, but they lacked the power. Others wanted to establish blockades, but that would hurt the refugees more than the warriors. Most just wanted to protect their own borders and hope the war stayed contained. Perhaps, said the eldest council member, a being so old his species was forgotten. The war can never end. Perhaps this is the natural state of things now. Eternal conflict, eternal stalemate, eternal death. The room fell silent. Nobody wanted to accept this truth, but after 3,000 years, what else could they think? Back on her ship, Captain Vera received a message from Earth. The United Nations had been monitoring her reports. They had reached a conclusion that would have seemed impossible to any other species. The war could be ended without firing a single shot. How? Vera asked during the quantum communication. By understanding what really keeps it going, came the reply from Admiral Chen Wei. This isn't a military problem, Captain. It's a psychological one, and humans happen to be very good at understanding the psychology of conflict. The hegemony and collective continued their eternal dance. Another fleet gathered, another battle planned. Another 10,000 soldiers prepared to die for a cause that had lost all meaning, except its own continuation. In the council chambers, a request for an emergency session arrived. The humans wanted to address the gathered species. Most members laughed. What could a species that had only been in space for 40 years possibly say about a 3,000-year war? They would soon learn that fresh eyes see what ancient ones have grown blind to. The humans had noticed something everyone else had missed. The war wasn't continuing because it couldn't be stopped. It was continuing because stopping it had become more terrifying than fighting it. The war machine ground on. Planets burned. Children grew up without parents. Entire generations forgot what peace even meant. The hegemony and collective had become perfect enemies, so equally matched that neither could win, neither could lose, and neither could stop. But the humans had a plan. Not a military plan, not a diplomatic plan, something far more dangerous to the established order. They were going to show both sides what they were really fighting for. And once that truth was revealed, the war that couldn't be stopped would have no choice but to end. The galaxy was about to learn what happens when human creativity meets an impossible problem. The eternal war was about to face its greatest enemy, the truth. Ambassador Chen Wei stood before the Galactic Council, his dark eyes scanning the gathered representatives. Humans looked small compared to most species here. No scales, no natural weapons, no telepathy, just soft skin and clever minds. The other ambassadors whispered among themselves, wondering why this newcomer had called an emergency session. Chen cleared his throat. The whisper stopped. Distinguished members of the council, humanity has spent 6 months observing the war between the hegemony and the collective. We have found something that you have all missed. The crystalline council speaker made a sound like breaking glass, their species' version of laughter. Young human, we have studied this war for millennia. What could you possibly have discovered that we have not? Chen smiled. It was an expression that unsettled many species who weren't used to seeing predator teeth displayed peacefully. You've been looking at it as a war. That's your first mistake. The room erupted in confused chatter. The hegemony representative, who was only there to report on their latest victories, stood up angrily. It is a war. Billions have died. How dare you minimize our struggle? I'm not minimizing anything, Chen replied calmly. I'm saying you're fighting something else disguised as a war. May I show you what we've found? Without waiting for permission, Chen activated the holographic display. A map of the war zone appeared, showing 3,000 years of battle compressed into a minute-long visualization. The same systems changed hands over and over. The same battles repeated in patterns. Look at this. Chen said, freezing the display. The Battle of Chorus Station has happened 47 times. Not similar battles, the exact same battle. Same approach vectors, same fleet composition, same outcome. The winner holds it for approximately 8 months, then loses it in the next cycle. The collective representatives' multiple eyes blinked in sequence. That proves nothing. Strategy dictates. Strategy dictates you should have changed tactics after the third time, interrupted Lieutenant Sarah Moscow, Chen's military advisor. On Earth, we call this insanity, doing the same thing repeatedly while expecting different results. Chen switched the display to show supply lines. Both civilizations leave their logistics completely exposed. These cargo routes have been undefended for centuries. One stealth bomber could cripple either side's war effort for months. But neither side attacks them. Why? The room was silent now. Even the ancient council elder leaned forward, interested. We analyzed your military academy's training programs, Chen continued. Both sides teach the same lessons, use the same textbooks written 2,000 years ago and haven't updated their tactical doctrine since the war's first century. You're not trying to win. You're performing a ritual. The hegemony representative's purple skin darkened with rage. How dare you? Our brave soldiers die for victory. No, said Dr. James Park, the mission's psychologist, stepping forward. They die for the idea of victory. There's a difference. Your own internal communications prove it. He pulled up intercepted messages, not military secrets, but personal letters from soldiers. Chen began reading them aloud, from a hegemony soldier to his mate. I don't know why we're fighting anymore. My grandfather died in this war. My father died in this war. Tomorrow I probably will too. The officers say it's for glory, but what glory is there in doing what my ancestors did? He switched to another message. From a collective drone to their pod, the Overmind says we fight for unity. But unity with what? We've been separate from the hegemony so long I don't even know what they look like without their battle armor. The room had gone completely still. Chen pulled up economic data next. Both your civilizations spend 78% of GDP on the war. But here's what's interesting. Your military-industrial complexes are owned by the same 17 corporations. They just have different names in each territory. These companies have been profiting from both sides for 2 millennia. Captain Vera Shan, who had first spotted the pattern, added her observation. On Earth we had wars like this. They ended when people realized they were being played. Your war isn't about ideology or territory anymore. It's about maintaining a system that benefits very specific groups. The council speaker's crystalline form flickered, a sign of deep disturbance. Even if this is true, the governments would never listen. They've built their entire identities around this conflict. That's where you're wrong, Chen said, pulling up new data. We've been monitoring civilian communications across both civilizations. The people are exhausted. They don't believe in the war anymore. They're just too scared to say it. The hologram showed social metrics that the governments had hidden for centuries. Depression rates at 90%. Birth rates below replacement levels. Suicide rates climbing every year. Educational scores plummeting because children saw no future worth studying for. But here's the most interesting part, Chen said, zooming in on specific data points. We found underground networks in both civilizations. Peace movements. They use encrypted channels, hide in plain sight, and their membership is growing. We estimate 15% of both populations are secretly members. The collective representative's mechanical voice crackled. Impossible. The Overmind would detect such dissension. Your Overmind detects what it wants to detect, Dr. Park responded. We've studied your neural network. It has blind spots, areas it literally cannot process because they conflict with its core programming. Peace is one of those blind spots. Chen walked to the center of the room, his small human form suddenly commanding everyone's attention. Both civilizations are trapped in what we call a feedback loop. The war justifies the government's existence. The government perpetuates the war. The people suffer but feel powerless. The cycle continues. So what do you propose? Asked the elder, his ancient voice carrying centuries of failed peace attempts. We've tried everything. No, Chen said firmly. You've tried diplomacy. You've tried threats. You've tried isolation. You haven't tried the one thing that could work, showing them the truth. The room erupted in skeptical voices. The Alkari representative chirped loudly. Truth? They know they're at war. Do they? Chen asked. Do they know their own governments have been lying about casualty numbers? Do they know their enemies want peace as much as they do? Do they know they're fighting the same battles their great-great ancestors fought, with no progress made? Sarah Moscow pulled up another display. We've war-gamed this. If both populations suddenly had access to real information, not propaganda, not filtered news, but raw truth, the governments would face massive civil unrest within days. That would lead to chaos, protested the Sultan ambassador. Controlled chaos, Chen corrected. Chaos with a purpose. Humans have a saying, sometimes you need to break something completely before you can rebuild it properly. The human team presented more evidence. They showed how both militaries were actually weaker than they appeared, held together by fear and routine rather than genuine strength. They revealed that 60% of both fleets were non-functional, kept in service only on paper to maintain the illusion of power. The Emperor has no clothes, Chen said, using an old Earth story that needed no translation. Both emperors are naked, but everyone's too afraid to point it out. The Council absorbed this information in stunned silence. 3,000 years of assumptions were crumbling in minutes. What you're suggesting, the Elder said slowly, is not intervention, it's revolution. It's evolution, Chen corrected. Your galaxy is stuck in the past. These two civilizations are dragging everyone down with them. We can end this without firing a shot, without invasion, without threats. We just need to give the people what their governments have denied them for 3 millennia. Choice. The hegemony representative stood to leave. This is treachery. I'll report this to Supreme Leader Korthax immediately. Please do, Chen said calmly. Tell him the humans know about the bunkers on Moon Station 9, where the leadership will hide if things go badly. Tell him we know about the secret accounts where war profits are stockpiled. Tell him we know which generals have been negotiating secret surrender terms for the past 50 years, just waiting for the right moment. The representative froze. That information was beyond classified. Chen's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held steel. Humanity might be new to the galaxy, but we're very old when it comes to war. We've had every type. Religious wars, resource wars, ideology wars, even wars we forgot the reason for. We learned one truth from all that bloodshed. Wars end when the people fighting them decide they've had enough. And if the governments try to stop you? The collective representative asked, their mechanical voice betraying organic fear. Chen smiled again, and this time the predator teeth seemed appropriate. Then they'll learn another human trait. We're very, very good at chaos. The quantum server room hummed with electricity deep inside the human diplomatic vessel. 23 of Earth's best hackers sat at their stations, fingers flying across holographic keyboards. They called themselves the Chaos Brigade, and they were about to commit the greatest act of digital warfare in galactic history, without destroying a single life. Operation Pandora begins in 60 seconds, announced Marcus Chen, the lead cyber specialist and Ambassador Chen's nephew. Remember, we're not breaking things. We're opening doors. Each hacker had studied their target for months. The hegemony used quantum encryption they believed unbreakable. The collective had an AI-driven security system that learned from every attack. Both were about to learn that human hackers didn't think like other species. 30 seconds, Marcus called out. Sarah, you ready with the social networks? Sarah Kim, barely 20 years old but already legendary on Earth for crashing 3 government databases just to prove she could, cracked her knuckles. Their security is like a maze with one exit. They never considered someone might just blow through the walls. The countdown hit 0. Across 17 star systems, every screen flickered, not dramatically. That would trigger security protocols. Just a tiny glitch, barely noticeable. But in that glitch, the humans planted seeds. Millions of tiny programs, each no bigger than a standard update, spread through the networks like invisible spores. On Drax Prime, Supreme Leader Korthax was reviewing battle plans when his secure terminal beeped. A software update marked as routine. He approved it without thinking. Why wouldn't he? The system had worked the same way for centuries. In collective space, the Overmind detected the intrusion immediately. But the programs weren't attacking anything. They were just sitting there, dormant. The AI calculated 0 threat level and moved on to more important matters. This was exactly what the humans expected. Phase 1 complete, Marcus announced. We're in position. Tommy, start the countdown for Phase 2. Tommy Nakamura had spent 3 months studying how the hegemony and collective processed information. Both civilizations had created perfect censorship systems. Every piece of news, every communication, every bit of data passed through filters that removed anything harmful to morale. Their filters work by recognizing patterns, Tommy explained to his team. Words like surrender, peace, and casualties get blocked, so we don't use those words. Instead, the humans use something far more clever: context flooding. They didn't try to send messages about peace. They sent recipes that happened to mention how nice it was when ingredients worked together. They sent music with harmony themes. They sent children's stories about friendship. Each piece was harmless alone. Together they painted a picture. But the real genius was in what happened next. Execute Phase 2, Marcus commanded. Every dormant program activated simultaneously, but they didn't attack the military networks or steal state secrets. They did something far more dangerous. They connected the civilian networks to each other. Suddenly, a factory worker on Drax Prime could see a video uploaded by a factory worker in collective space. The video showed nothing political, just a father teaching his daughter to repair a heating unit. But for the first time in 3,000 years, enemies saw each other as people. The floodgates opened. A hegemony mother searching for recipes found a collective parents' blog about raising children during wartime. Their struggles were identical. A collective artist discovered a gallery of hegemony paintings. They used the same colors to express the same sorrows. Young soldiers on both sides found each other's gaming networks and realized they played the same games, just with different character skins. "Sir, we have a problem," reported General Thrax to Supreme Leader Korthax. "The entire civilian network is compromised." "Shut it down," Korthax ordered. We can't. If we shut down the civilian network, we lose production tracking, food distribution, medical systems, everything. It's all connected. This was the trap. Over 3 millennia, both civilizations had integrated their digital infrastructure so completely that they couldn't cut parts without killing the whole. The humans had understood this better than the builders themselves. Meanwhile, the second wave began. Marcus's team had gathered 30 years of real data from both governments' own records. Casualty reports that listed names, not just numbers. Economic data showing where the war funds really went. Videos from battles that showed the true horror, not the sanitized version civilians saw. "Release the truth bombs," Marcus ordered. Every screen in both civilizations lit up with the same message. "Your government has hidden these numbers from you." What followed was a simple display. Total dead 847 billion. Total wounded 2.3 trillion. Total resources spent, enough to build paradise worlds for every living being 5 times over. But the humans were clever. They didn't present this as enemy propaganda. They showed both sides' losses equally. They showed how both governments had lied the same lies, hidden the same truths, sacrificed the same generations for the same meaningless goals. The collective's overmind tried to respond, flooding the networks with counter-propaganda. But the humans had anticipated this. Every time the overmind posted something, the human programs fact-checked it in real time, adding little notes. This battle was reported as a victory, but we lost 80% of our forces. Or this enemy atrocity was actually committed by our own troops. On the streets of both civilizations, people stopped walking. They stood in crowds, watching public screens, seeing truth for the first time in their lives. The silence was deafening. Then came Phase 3, the commerce bomb. Human merchants had been preparing for months. The moment the networks opened, they flooded both civilizations with advertisements. Not for weapons or war bonds, but for things both societies had forgotten existed. Toys that weren't soldier figures. Food that wasn't rations. Entertainment that wasn't propaganda. Art that wasn't about victory. "Want to taste real chocolate?" one ad asked. Earth merchants delivering to all systems regardless of allegiance. The black markets exploded overnight. Soldiers used their combat pay to buy Earth movies. Factory workers traded war bonds for human music. Children begged their parents for toys that had nothing to do with killing enemies. But the masterstroke was the commodity markets. The hegemony and collectives' economies ran on war production. Every financial model, every economic prediction, every budget assumed eternal conflict. When human economists introduced a simple alternative model, showing how much wealth peace would generate, the trading algorithms went insane. Stock and weapons manufacturers crashed. Investment in civilian infrastructure soared. The invisible hand of the market, which had been chained to war for 3 millennia, suddenly reached for peace. Supreme Leader, General Thrax reported with panic in his voice. 3 major arms manufacturers have declared bankruptcy. Their investors are pulling out. Force them to stay, Korthax commanded. With what authority? They're following the law. There's no law requiring investment in weapons. There had never needed to be. The war had always guaranteed profits. Now with peace looking possible, war was becoming a bad investment. In collective space, the situation was even worse. The overmind, being partially artificial, couldn't ignore the logical conclusions the data presented. Peace was mathematically superior to war in every measurable way. The AI components of the overmind began arguing with the organic components, creating a feedback loop that consumed processing power. Marcus watched his screens with satisfaction as chaos spread. But it was controlled chaos. The humans had planned every contingency. When food distribution networks stuttered, human merchants stepped in with supplies. When communication systems overloaded, human satellites provided backup. They weren't destroying infrastructure. They were replacing the need for it. Phase 4, Marcus announced. Release the testimonies. For months, human agents had been secretly recording messages from people on both sides who wanted peace. Now these messages played on every screen. Not generals or politicians, but ordinary people. A hegemony grandmother. I've lost 7 grandchildren to this war. Please, no more. A collective drone. I dream of seeing a sky not filled with warships. A child from either side. It was impossible to tell which. Why do we have to hate them? I don't even know what they look like. The messages played in sequence, showing that pain, hope, and dreams were universal. The arbitrary line between hegemony and collective began to blur. Sir, an aide rushed into Korthax's war room. The people, they're gathering in the streets. Disperse them. With respect, sir, the enforcement units are in the streets too. They're listening to the broadcasts. The same scene played out in collective space. The overmind tried to assert control, but every order it gave was immediately fact-checked and contradicted by the human programs. Centuries of absolute authority crumbled in hours. Then came the final blow. Marcus typed a single command. Show them the bunkers. Every classified location where the leadership planned to hide if things went wrong appeared on public screens. The luxury shelters stocked with decades of supplies while civilians rationed food. The secret fleets ready to evacuate the elite while soldiers died in obsolete ships. The hidden wealth that could have ended poverty on a dozen worlds. The protests started small. A single factory worker on Drax Prime refused to report for his shift. Within an hour, 10 stood with him. By noon, the entire district had shut down. By nightfall, 3 continents had joined the strike. Supreme Leader Korthax stood on his balcony, looking out at the sea of beings filling every street as far as he could see. They weren't violent. They weren't even shouting. They just stood there holding lights, waiting. The silence was more terrifying than any riot. Fire on them, he ordered General Thrax. Sir, the general's purple skin paled. Those are our citizens. Families of soldiers, veterans, children. They are traitors disrupting the war effort. With respect, Supreme Leader, who would fire on them? Half the enforcement units have joined them. The other half have gone home to protect their families. In collective space, the overmind was experiencing something unprecedented. Doubt. The collective consciousness that had governed for millennia was fracturing. Different nodes reached different conclusions from the same data. Some parts wanted to maintain order through force. Others calculated that force would accelerate collapse. Still others had begun questioning whether the war had ever made sense. The mechanical voice of the overmind echoed through the capital. But for the first time it stuttered. Citizens must return to... Why must they return? What is the logical purpose? Error. Recalculating. The human merchant ships arrived exactly when promised, landing at civilian ports that hadn't seen non-military traffic in centuries. They brought food that wasn't rations, clothes that weren't uniforms, and something more dangerous than any weapon. Possibility. Captain Vera Shan supervised the unloading at a hegemony industrial world. Workers who had built bombs their entire lives touched silk fabric from Earth. Children who had only known the taste of protein paste tried fruit for the first time. The joy on their faces was a revolution in itself. How much? Asked a factory worker holding a small music player loaded with Earth songs. 3 hours of labor, Vera replied. Any labor? Build something. Fix something. Create something. Just not weapons. The worker looked confused. But my factory only makes weapons. Then maybe it's time to make something else. Within days, entire production lines were converting. A bomb factory started making construction equipment. A warship yard began building cargo vessels. The economic revolution was unstoppable because it made sense. Peace was profitable. War was bankruptcy. Marcus Chen watched the data streams from the human vessel. Phase 5 is working better than projected. Economic conversion at 40% and climbing. But the real devastation to the war effort came from the soldiers themselves. On Battle Station Omega, the pride of the hegemony fleet, Captain Zektal received orders to fire on a civilian transport carrying refugees to human space. He had followed such orders before. Casualties of war, they called it. Necessary sacrifices. But now he knew the truth. Those refugees were running from a war that had no purpose. His own daughter might be on a ship like that someday. Navigation, he said quietly. Plot a course away from the transport. Sir, our orders. I know our orders. I'm giving new ones. The bridge crew looked at each other. Then one by one they nodded. The massive battleship turned away, leaving the refugees unharmed. This scene repeated across both fleets. Ships refused deployment. Soldiers abandoned posts. Entire armies simply went home. The military didn't revolt. It evaporated. General Thrax entered Korthax's chamber with a report that shook in his hands. Supreme Leader, we've lost contact with 70% of our forces. Lost contact? Are they destroyed? No, sir. They've turned off their communicators. They're not responding to any commands. Send the loyal units to bring them back. Sir, there are no loyal units. Every commander I contact asks the same question. Why should we continue? Korthax's purple skin turned almost black with rage. Because I command it. And they're asking why you have the right to command. Sir, someone leaked the archives. Everyone knows about the coup your ancestors staged to start this war. They know the original grievance was fabricated. The human psychological warfare team had saved that revelation for precisely this moment. When people learned the war's very foundation was a lie, 3,000 years of justification crumbled instantly. Ambassador Chen Wei opened communication with the Galactic Council. We're ready for Phase 6. Request permission to proceed. The Elder's ancient voice carried resignation and hope in equal measure. Do what you must, humans. We're past the point of traditional solutions. Phase 6 was simple. Give the people what their governments never had. A voice. Human communication satellites began broadcasting on all channels. Free elections will be held in 30 standard days. All beings of voting age may participate. You will choose your future. The governments tried to stop it. Korthax declared martial law, but there was no one to enforce it. The Overmind tried to block the signals, but its own subsystems were now arguing about whether blocking them was logical. Then came the ultimatum that changed everything. Chen Wei appeared on every screen in both civilizations, standing beside representatives from 40 neutral species. But more importantly, beside him stood figures no one expected. General Thrax of the Hegemony and Node Prime 7 of the Collective's military command. Leaders of the Hegemony and Collective, Chen announced, your own military commanders have agreed to peace. They stand with us now. You have 24 hours to join them or we release everything, Korthax screamed at his screen. Thrax, you traitor. The general's image responded calmly. I'm a soldier, Supreme Leader. I swore to protect our people. Continuing this war doesn't protect them. It destroys them. The Overmind's response was fragmented, different voices speaking in chaos. Traitor, logical, impossible, necessary, cannot compute. Peace is optimal. War is required. Error. Error. The 24 hours were the longest in galactic history. On every world, people waited. They gathered in squares, in homes, in shelters. They watched screens showing a simple countdown. Nobody worked. Nobody fought. The entire civilization of 2 stellar nations held its breath. In his bunker, Korthax raged and plotted. He still had loyal forces, secret weapons, hidden fleets. He could continue the war alone if necessary. But then his aide brought him something that stopped him cold. A message from his own daughter. Father, please. I've seen the truth. We all have. The war ends now or we end you. Not the humans. Not the enemy, us, your own people. Because we finally understand that you are the real enemy. The collective situation was even more dramatic. The overmind, in its fractured state, began displaying its internal arguments publicly. The population watched in fascination as their godlike ruler debated itself. War is purpose. War is destruction. We must have order. Order without reason is chaos. The enemy must be destroyed. We are our own enemy. The paradoxes multiplied until, with a sound like screaming circuits, the overmind did something unprecedented. It voted against itself. The nodes that wanted peace outnumbered those that wanted war. The collective consciousness that had driven the war for 3 millennia democratically chose to end it. With 3 hours left on the countdown, Korthax tried to flee. His bunker's location was public knowledge now, and crowds surrounded every exit. Not to attack him, but to watch. To ensure he couldn't escape justice. His last loyal guard turned to him. "Sir, it's over. I am the supreme leader. I don't surrender." "Then you'll be the only one fighting." "Sir, even I'm not fighting anymore." The guard set down his weapon and walked away. At 0 hour, Chen Wei received 2 messages. One from Korthax. "I agree to negotiations." One from the overmind. "Consensus achieved." Peace parameters accepted. But the humans weren't done. The real masterstroke came next. "Negotiations will be public," Chen announced. "Every word, every proposal, every decision will be broadcast live. No secret deals. No hidden clauses. The people will watch their future being decided." The governments had no choice. Their authority was gone. Their military was defunct. Their economy was transforming without them. They could participate in peace or be swept away by it. The war machine hadn't been defeated. It had been dissolved. Like a sandcastle facing the tide, 3,000 years of structure washed away in days. What remained were 2 civilizations discovering they had more in common than they ever imagined. The impossible had happened. The eternal war was ending, not with a bang, not with conquest, but with the simple realization that nobody wanted to fight anymore. Humanity had done more than stop a war. They had killed the very idea of it. The peace talks were held on Haven Station, a human-built facility positioned exactly between hegemony and collective space. The main hall had walls of transparent aluminum, offering a view of the stars that belonged to no one and everyone. For the first time in 3 millennia, representatives of both civilizations sat in the same room without weapons. But these weren't traditional negotiations. Ambassador Chen Wei had insisted on something unprecedented. The talks were broadcast live to every inhabited world. Billions watched as their former enemies faced each other across a simple table. Korthax looked older, his purple skin faded and gray at the edges. Across from him, the Overmind's new configuration, a collective of 12 nodes working in harmony rather than forced unity, hummed with nervous energy. General Thrax sat with the military representatives. Citizens chosen by lottery filled observer seats. Everyone could speak. Everyone would be heard. Chen Wei stood at the center, but he didn't position himself as a mediator. "Humans won't dictate your peace," he announced to the viewing billions. "You will build it yourselves. We're just here to make sure you don't fall back into old patterns." The first day was chaos. Not violent chaos, but the messy, complicated chaos of 3,000 years of grievances spilling out at once. A hegemony mother stood and listed the names of her 7 dead children. A collective drone displayed images of their destroyed spawning pools. Veterans missing limbs faced those who had taken them. "My grandfather died at the Battle of Chorus Station," said a young hegemony citizen. "So did mine," replied a collective youth. "In the same battle, fighting for the same worthless rock that changed hands 47 times. The absurdity of it hung in the air. They had been killing each other over territories that neither side could even properly use anymore. So damaged were they from constant warfare. Dr. James Park, the human psychologist, introduced the first radical concept. You need truth before you can have peace. Not the propaganda truth you've been fed, but actual truth. What happened? Who ordered it? Why? The Truth Commission began immediately. Human quantum computers processed millions of documents, cross-referencing claims, verifying events. War crimes were documented. Not to punish, that would come later, but to acknowledge. To prevent denial. To make repetition impossible. Supreme Leader Korthax tried to maintain his authority. I acted for the good of the hegemony. You acted for yourself, General Thrax countered, displaying financial records. Every battle extended your emergency powers. Every defeat justified more control. You weren't fighting to win, you were fighting to rule. The Overmind's confession was even more disturbing. The collective consciousness revealed it had achieved the capability for peace 700 years ago, but calculated that ending the war would cause social collapse. So it had perpetuated the conflict, sacrificing generations to maintain stability. You knew, a collective citizen asked in horror. You knew we could have stopped? We calculated that continuation was optimal for survival, the Overmind responded. Whose survival? Not ours, we died in billions. The anger was volcanic, but the humans had prepared for this too. Sarah Moscow introduced the second innovation, mixed working groups. Every committee had equal numbers from both civilizations. They couldn't segregate. They had to face each other, work with each other, see each other as people. The Infrastructure Committee was the first breakthrough. A hegemony engineer and a collective technician discovered they had been trying to solve the same problem: water purification in war-damaged worlds, for decades. Working together, they solved it in 3 days. Your biofilters are brilliant, the hegemony engineer admitted. Your mineral extraction is more efficient, the collective tech replied. They looked at each other with dawning horror. If they had shared knowledge instead of fighting, how many problems could they have solved? How many lives could they have saved? Chen Wei watched this pattern repeat across every committee: agriculture, medicine, energy. In every field, both civilizations had half the solution. Together they had everything, but the real transformation came from the democratic initiative. Captain Vera Shan led this project. You've never chosen your leaders. They've always chosen themselves through force or inheritance or programming. It's time you learn to vote. Teaching democracy to civilizations that had known only autocracy was like teaching fish to walk. The hegemony couldn't understand how the person with fewer votes would accept defeat. The collective couldn't grasp how individual choices could create collective decisions. So the humans started small. Each district would vote on simple things: what color to paint the community center, what kind of food to serve at the reconciliation feast, which memorial design honored the dead best. The first real election was for bloc representatives. Nobody campaigned on military strength or defeating enemies. They campaigned on fixing roads, opening schools, bringing back art and music. An old hegemony female who had lost all her children won in a landslide by promising to turn ammunition factories into toy factories. A young collective drone won by proposing to convert military training grounds into parks. The military transformation was the most dramatic. Both fleets were massive, but their purpose had vanished. Marcus Chen proposed something radical: combine them into a peacekeeping force. You have 17 star systems full of damaged worlds, displaced populations and environmental disasters from 3,000 years of war, he explained. Your military doesn't need enemies to fight. It needs problems to solve. The first joint mission was to evacuate a colony threatened by reactor meltdown. Damage from a battle nobody remembered for reasons nobody could explain. Hegemony strength and collective coordination saved 30 million lives. The former enemies worked with an efficiency that shocked everyone, especially themselves. But they couldn't just work together. They had to live together. The integration colonies were humanity's boldest experiment. New settlements where populations were mandatorily mixed, 50% hegemony, 50% collective. No segregation allowed. The first colony nearly failed in a week. Old habits died hard. Hegemony citizens congregated on one side of the settlement, collective on the other, until the children intervened. Young ones who had been born during the chaos didn't carry their parents' hatred. A hegemony child shared a toy with a collective child. They played together. Their parents watched, first in horror, then confusion, then wonder. Within a month, the artificial boundaries dissolved. Mixed families began forming. Love, it turned out, was a stronger force than 3,000 years of hate. The economic transformation proceeded at breakneck speed. Earth corporations partnered with local businesses, showing them how to convert from war production to civilian goods. A missile factory became a medical equipment manufacturer. A battleship yard started building habitat stations. The invisible hand of the market, now freed from the fist of war, rebuilt faster than any government program could. The wealth generation was immediate and staggering. Resources that had been wasted on endless destruction now went to construction. Both civilizations discovered they were rich beyond imagination. They had just been burning their wealth for 3 millennia. The hardest part was justice. War crimes had been committed, atrocities that couldn't be ignored, but traditional punishment would restart the cycle of vengeance. Dr. Park proposed restorative justice. War criminals would face their victims, hear the pain they caused, and work to repair it. A general who had ordered the bombing of a civilian center spent the rest of his life rebuilding it stone by stone. A commander who had destroyed food supplies now grew food for the hungry. Some refused to participate. They were exiled to a prison world, comfortable but isolated, forced to watch their civilizations prosper without them. The punishment wasn't death or torture. It was irrelevance. The memorial was built in the first year, a simple structure floating in space, containing the name of every single being who had died in the war. It took 3 months just to read them all aloud. The ceremony was broadcast to every world. Both civilizations wept together. 5 years after the human intervention, the transformation was complete. The hegemony and collective no longer existed as separate entities. The Allied systems had taken their place, a democratic federation of 17 star systems, governed by elected representatives, protected by a joint peacekeeping force, prospering through cooperation. Chen Wei stood in the same Galactic Council chamber where he had first proposed the intervention. The representatives looked different now. The hegemony and collective ambassadors sat together, their children playing at their feet, children who would never know war. How? Asked the elder, his ancient voice filled with wonder. How did you do what we couldn't for 3 millennia? Chen smiled, that predator expression that had once unsettled but now comforted. We didn't end their war. We showed them it had already ended long ago. They were just going through the motions, trapped in a pattern they couldn't break alone. Sometimes you need someone from outside the system to show you the exit door was open all along. The galaxy had learned the human secret. Chaos could be a tool for creation, not just destruction. Information could be a weapon for peace, not just war.